I thought to talk about today, in maybe a lighthearted way, a very small appraisal of a printed book by asking the question, what is the value of the Gutenberg Bible if one came to the market? Now, this is not a Gutenberg Bible. It is an early printed book, but I had to hold something. But I will get back to this book a little bit later. The Gutenberg Bible is probably the most expensive book in the entire world, and rightly so. We used to refer to it very casually as the first printed book. It is not. Technically, it really is one of the first printed books using mass-produced movable metal type in Europe. And it probably was preceded by some religious papers, some church indulgences, or the school book for Latin boys of Donatus, printed by Gutenberg. So go find me that one. But it certainly is the most famous book. Is it a rare book? Well, we have very high standards in the rare book world of what is rare. Sometimes if there's 5 or 6 copies, we're like, forget that in the entire world. But there are 49 surviving copies of the Gutenberg Bible in whole or in part, fragments. There were probably 180 that were printed, 150 on paper, maybe 30 on vellum, and we know that from some of the court documents and lawsuits that went on during the period. So conceivably, one could come to market. You might be able to find a fragment somewhere in the world. However, unlikely that is, things do turn up. First folios of Shakespeare pop up from time to time. What is the point of valuing something most people would just call priceless? Well, of course, there's nothing really priceless. If you go to an exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and they're bringing in treasures from around the world, of course, all of those have been insured and valued, even if they are indeed priceless. But for me, the exercise is more about engagement, because the lure of a big number, that headline grabbing, the Gutenberg Bible is worth da-da-da-da, really gets people to engage with the Gutenberg Bible. And that is a large umbrella under which they can start to get into early printed books, books in general, and before long, they are book collectors. Now, when I was young, I used to go to the Victoria and Albert Museum or strolling through the British Museum, and I would look at the Rosetta Stone here or the marble there, and I would say, what is all of this worth? Now, of course, that is a rather crass question, perhaps. I should have just been marveling at the artistic merit of the cartoons of Raphael commissioned by Leo X for the Sistine Chapel, and not been asking how much they are worth. But like I said, that goes back to engagement. When you ask that question, and it does excite kids, it makes them try to understand the historical and cultural importance of something and why something is desirable. I think that stayed with me even, of course, until today, when I don't have a particular affection for the works, let's say, of Cy Twombly. A lot of them look like Einstein scribbling on a blackboard on a bad day. But when I saw that his Untitled by New York City, in parentheses, sold for $70 million, I think at Sotheby's, and a headline-grabbing number, I was curious, what would make somebody pay $70 million for this? I have to go check that out, and I learned a little bit about an area of art of which I generally know nothing. Even in recent weeks, I'm sure you've been hearing about non-fungible tokens and how an NFT of Beeple sold for $69 million. And I knew little about NFTs, but sure enough, after seeing that headline-grabbing number, I learned a lot about them rather quickly, and I even experimented in making one of a signed Andy Warhol piece, and I'll put that link below if you want to check out the fun NFT that I made. So how do we value a Gutenberg Bible that is priceless? Well, we do have some data points, luckily. There are individual leaves from the Gutenberg Bible that do come up to auction with some frequency. Most of those leaves come from a dismembered copy in 1921 known as the Noble Fragment that was broken up into a leaf book. And when those individual leaves come up, they tend to get about $60,000 a leaf, depending on whether it's from the Old Testament or the New Testament. For some reason, the New Testament leaves seem to be valued slightly higher. Go Jesus. And it depends also perhaps on the biblical passage. I'm sure if you have the one from the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not find that cheap. If we take a crude calculation of the average price of $60,000 a leaf and we multiply it by the number of leaves in the Gutenberg Bible, which is 646, I think it's 1,286 pages, it comes out to about $38 million, just a sum of running through all of the pages. Of course, we know that the sum is greater than the parts. Those individual leaves from the Noble Fragment are really interesting, actually, when you go and study them. If you want to examine that particular copy, you can probably go back all the way to 1499, when Ulrich Zell printed the Cologne Chronicle. And in that chronicle, he mentioned a country squire named Gutenberg that printed the first Bible in the Vulgate. And for about 200 plus years, people did not know exactly which book he was referring to. But when they definitively figured out that it was the 42-line black letter Bible, which we know as the Gutenberg Bible, it started a frenzy in the late 18th century for collectors to get their hands on one. And that led into 1803, when the court library in Munich actually acquired 3 copies of the Gutenberg, largely from the dissolution of convents in the period. One of those copies was missing 50 leaves and was known as the Mannheim copy. That copy was then purchased by Robert Curzon. If you don't know who Robert Curzon is, he's one of my favorite 19th century adventurers, a manuscript hunter and a true-life Indiana Jones, and his 1849, I think it's Voyages or Travels to Monasteries in the Levant, is certainly worth reading. Very enjoyable read, and I'll put a copy, I think it's available on Kindle, of that below, right below my Warhol NFT there. He bought it, and perhaps it paled in comparison with the unbelievable manuscript treasures that he was finding. So he barely mentioned it, and actually it wasn't well known until it came to light. It descended in his family in 1920 at auction, and it was purchased by a bookseller named Gabriel Wells, who then decided to break up the Gutenberg into individual leaves. He kept some whole books together, like the Book of Genesis or the Apocalypse, and he sold them for $150, along with an enthusiastic essay by one of the great bibliophiles, A.E. Newton. That brings us to a second data point we can use in the evaluation of the Gutenberg, because in 2015, one of those books from the Mannheim Noble Fragment copy came to auction at Sotheby's, an 8-leaf fragment, but a complete book of Esther, and those 8 leaves sold for $975,000. And that's quite interesting, because that's actually about $120,000 a leaf, or 2 times the value of an individual leaf on a per leaf basis. So we do see the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. In terms of going into the auction record and other copies that have sold, we'd have to go back to 1987. That was the last time at auction in a public sale a Gutenberg Bible was sold. Only volume 1 from the Countess Estelle Doheny on behalf of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. And that got $4.9 million, $5.3 million with the 10% buyer's premium added in. That's only when they charge 10%. Now it's like 27. Can we go back to 1987? And if we want to look back in the public record, we'd have to, I think, go back to 1978, which was a banner year for buying the Gutenberg Bible when 3 copies came to market. H.P. Krauss sold a copy. I think he got, 1.2 million. Copy went to auction for $2.2 million. And the Ransom Center in Texas purchased the famous Pforzheimer copy for $2.4 million. Those records from the 1970s are really not appropriate in doing a current day appraisal. I just mention it because especially the ransom copy is particularly interesting if you're studying how the appreciation of books has changed over time. When that particular copy first came to market in the 18th centuries, it was described as a fine copy. By 1860s, nothing had happened to it, but then it was described as a poor copy, largely because it had annotations, handwriting, and some unusual decoration. For those very reasons today, it's extremely desirable. That's of great interest to scholars to see how the Gutenberg Bible was decorated and read. So the one in Texas is one of the most interesting Gutenberg Bibles in the world. So you can go check that out, of course. In terms of modern day appraisals, there's only one really that I even know of. That's a story that goes back to World War II at the end, when the Red Army and the trophy brigades of the Soviet Union took from Germany 2 Gutenberg Bibles back to Moscow. Those Bibles were lost from the record, and when they did the census in the 1980s, they did not know the whereabouts of them. One of them from Leipzig was actually then stolen in 2009 by a Russian colonel. There's a John le Carre spy novel for you right now, or Tom Clancy. The Russian colonel stole it. He offered it on the black market for $1.5 million. He was apprehended, and in his trial, the Gutenberg Bible had to be appraised. It was appraised at $20 million, or the equivalent of that. I think that sounds incredibly low. I think the appraised had a few too many shots of vodka that day. But that is the only recent appraisal that was done in about 2014 that I can think of. I think, however, the best data point is really that 2015 sale of the Book of Esther of 8 leaves, because again, that got 2 times the value of the sum of the individual leaves. Then if we look at the Doheny copy by comparison in 1987 at $5.3 million, during that period, you could purchase a single leaf for $5,000. So if you sum up all those leaves, the single full volume actually got about 3 times the value of the individual leaves. So you can see the sum of the whole is greater than its parts. And of course, it would be fair to assign a value, I think, if an entire 2-volume set came up to auction today of probably 4 times the value of the individual leaves. And if you calculate that $60,000 times 4 times the leaves, you'll get to a number of about $150 million or so. So there's your headline-grabbing number. The Gutenberg Bible, if one came to auction today, is worth $150 million, putting it up with one of the most valuable works of art in the entire world, and rightly so. And of course, that excludes the possibility of wild bidding in excess of that by trophy hunters with all of the billionaires around today. Back to that umbrella of the Gutenberg, like I said, the book I hold in my hand is Hugh de Saint-Victor's Didascalicon. It is printed in 1474, so within 20 years of the printing of the Gutenberg Bible, and it is an absolutely fascinating incunable. It is an encyclopedia one of the earliest encyclopedias of the medieval arts and sciences, and a very rare book in commerce at least. So you can purchase a fascinating early printed book like that, as I said, within 2 decades of the Gutenberg, for probably, at least for me, half the price or so of a single leaf of the Gutenberg Bible, which is, I think today, half the price, half a Bitcoin, or I would gladly sell this if you see this video in 10 years, perhaps for, 1/10 of a Bitcoin, because I'm sure it's going to shoot up even to more crazy levels by then. So thank you for listening to my evaluation of the Gutenberg Bible, and hope you tune in for some other episodes with some fun tidbits, secrets, stories about the rare book and antiquarian trade.